Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Hello from Red Canary and Carbon Black. Thank you all for joining Techniques for Detecting Post-Exploitation with EDR. A few housekeeping items. So we're going to be running for around 45 to 50 minutes, and then we're going to have time at the end for questions. However, we're also going to be stopping throughout the talk to answer your questions as they come in. So you should all see the ability to ask questions with the GoToWebinar toolbar. So please make sure to send them throughout the webinar, and we're going to do our best to answer them. With that, I'm excited to introduce Joe Moles, the Director of Detection Operations at Red Canary, and Rick McElroy, Security Strategist from Carbon Black. Rick, would you mind introducing yourself a bit more?
Sure, Rick McElroy. I've been doing information security for about 18 years now. Worked on the DoD side of the house, worked on the commercial side of the house, really focused the last 10 or 12 years around building fast, sustainable security programs from the ground up to address some of these more advanced threats. And given what's been happening in the malware space and sort of this explosion of innovation, I got really curious about it and then got lucky enough to land over at Carbon Black, who is in a position, I think globally, to start to stem some of the tide on these attacks. So very excited to be here today, very excited to talk post-exploitation. I think it's an area that we underserve when we build our programs, and we'll talk a little bit about that. With that, I'll kick it back over to Joe.
Hey, I'm Joe Moles. I'm the Director of Security Operations over here. Been 12, 15 years, give or take, various InfoSec work, mostly on the defensive side, so everything e-discovery, forensics, SOC, IR. Had my hands in a little bit, mostly on the corporate side. Been with Red Canary now for coming up on 3 years, working on running our detection operations program here, building that out, and continuing to grow. Continuing to grow the team and the effort here. Post-exploitation activities, kind of a personal passion of mine from a detection capability standpoint, and continuing to watch where that's migrating and growing, and sharing that information with everybody here. So looking forward to the discussion, and we'll jump right in. So just a little overview. Kind of how the flow of this discussion is going to go. First, we're going to be talking about how post-exploitation fits into your standard attack lifecycle. Then we'll define post-exploitation kits, provide an example that we'll be basing most of our demonstrations off of, talk about how EDR and endpoint telemetry data helps you detect that activity, and then, like I mentioned, present some real-world examples of actual attacks in the wild that we've seen from a couple different lenses. One from the lens of an actual hands-on-the-keyboard compromise, one from our internal lab testing, and then one from a customer who was doing some red team activity as part of their internal pen testing. Just to show an example of how that activity all looks the same and how you can use that information both to expand your detection capabilities and to test yourself. So first off, we'll just kind of talk about what we mean when we say post-exploitation. This is a great diagram presented by Microsoft. They had a good article not that long ago and this really represents kind of where in that attack lifecycle post-exploit activity resides, and then what that kind of process is from the initial land on the system, escalate locally, and then moving laterally and further expanding privileges and data collection. So, Rick, do you want to add in some information about this more from your experience on the CISO and strategic level?
Yeah, totally. I think the first thing I'll say is we've invested heavily on prevention of the front end of the chain, right? So as the machines are compromised, we've invested in antivirus to try to stop this stuff. We've got content filtering that's filtering some of these pieces out. We've got, of course, our firewalls are doing some of this good filtering. But what we haven't done, in my opinion, is really look at the back end of this, right? And this is where the nasty stuff starts to occur. This is where the credentials are harvested. This is where they start pivoting around your systems. They're getting more and more access. They're doing lateral movement. So I think it's time for us, as the people who build the programs and architects these things, to refactor and re-architect our stacks to not only do the prevention up front, but detect them once the malware lands on the disk and they start to do some of these activities. And you'll see why traditionally tools have sort of left us defenseless for that, right? PowerShell's on every box that's out there. We're going to talk a lot about it today. It's everywhere. It's hard to secure, and IT teams love it, but so do the bad guys, right? So the last thing I'll leave you with is just remember, malware is a means to an end, right? So they do want malware on your box, and I'll take ransomware aside, right? Because ransomware is built for one purpose. But all the other malware, what they want to do is land it on your box and then do activities, right? So they want command and control. They actually want to be able to put hands on a keyboard and interact with your systems. So malware prevention isn't enough. It's good. We still need to do that stuff. But it really becomes about rapid detection and response on the other side of it.
Thanks, Rick. So just a kind of a highlight of some of the activities we're going to be talking about. We're referencing the attack matrix. So this is the MITRE framework for security detection and prevention. Just talking about some of these key activities that really fall into the sweet spot of post-exploitation activity. These follow kind of the standard flow of activities that an attacker is going to be doing once they land on a box and they start expanding their foothold, expanding their privileges, start harvesting data. These are some of the key things that once the attacker's in the door, this is what they're going to be looking to do. One of the things that we've kind of seen is a kind of a growth in the accessibility of post-exploit kits. There's been a significant proliferation from traditional black market to open, kind of the more open market. Rick, again, you want to jump in there a little bit on where you've seen kind of that change in the market structure from availability of attack tools?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a fairly recent phenomenon, right, in technology. We'll talk like last 3 years and the explosion of things like ransomware as a service, right? Or, hey, I need somebody to do some coding on PowerShell Empire so I can bypass a piece of technology. And the big thing to remember is all this stuff is being traded, right? So you have malicious actors that are selling 0 days in code to other malicious actors who are then using them to breach systems. You have folks that pay Bitcoin and don't actually have to code anything, right? So I think the rampant nature of this stuff is due to how easy it actually is to A, exploit a box, to go get an exploit off the dark web and do it, or B, pay somebody else to do it. So just remember, it's not always just a single group of, 2 guys in a hoodie sitting in a dark room listening to techno music. This is a huge business, right? Even just moving 0 days around is a huge business. I mean, you can get 50K for one of them right now. So just remember that. I mean, we're defending against an entire business structure, right? Which includes QA and all of the good things that we do to produce code. They're also doing that.
I'll expand on what Rick said too, especially from the kind of that secondary, that post-exploit idea, is we're starting to see a trend of the community opening up. More researchers are sharing their information, more attackers are sharing their information, more of this tools and details are readily available. It's well documented, it's clearly shared. There's actually some, traditionally malware was very poorly coded and kind of hacked together to kind of play a pun on that term. But it's also these newer tools, these newer post-exploit kits are being shared through GitHub, through social media, both on the good side and the bad side, so to speak. Researchers are using this information and sharing it out, sharing their source code, sharing their tools for teams doing red teams, teams doing detection, and presenting that information and making it available to the public. But at the same time, now that it's so readily available, it's so easy for everybody else to start using. So some of the trends that we're seeing in these post-exploit kits, moving more and more towards using internal tools. On the Windows side, we're seeing Windows, PowerShell, WScript, CScript, all your basic scripting engines that are built in there. On the Mac side, Mac Linux, you got again your standard shells, so sh bash, Python, Ruby, all those things are kind of are built in, and then those tools are being leveraged to to build on build tooling, so they don't have to bring additional code, they don't have to bring additional binaries, they don't have to do any of that stuff. It's all available through trusted sources, and it's already built into the target operating system. Typically, a lot of this stuff, because they're doing it in memory, they're doing it with existing code and tooling out of box, there's not a lot of forensic artifacts that traditionally were there from a drop some binary, a piece of malware that self-propagates itself and moves around. But at the same time, there's still, you get full reverse shells, full hands on the keyboard accessibility within these tool sets. Also looking forward, there is more and more cross-platform availability of resources. We're seeing, PowerShells coming to Mac. So all your PowerShell tools that are being used for sysadmin and for bad guys on your Windows boxes, they're coming to Mac. Thank you, Mac. But on the same thing, with Windows 10, they're doing the same thing. All your bash scripting, all your, so all the guys that have been doing Unix-based sysadmin, with their bash scripts and being able to do that, and then also using those type of scripts and those type of activities on the Linux and Mac side are coming to Windows. So these tools and these behaviors are becoming more and more cross-platform. No single operating system is immune to this activity. Once they're in the door, the tools are available for them to start doing something. Just again, further expanding on some of the difference that we're seeing between commodity malware and post-exploit kits. Your commodity malware, it's typically automated. A lot of times anymore, it's kind of fire and forget, automated botnet, expansion, things like that. Typically, the first pass is not hands on the keyboard. There's potentially something gets automated, pushed out through spam, through watering hole attack, and then once that's established, then opportunities provided for somebody to get their hands on the box. A lot of these, the typical what we call commodity malware anymore is largely financially gained. Hey, I'm looking to establish a botnet so I can then rent it out and make my Bitcoin. There's a whole market, and as Rick mentioned, there's a whole market around this. Click fraud, again, financial gain. How can I redirect and generate revenue by leveraging somebody's system to browse to ads for me? And then ransomware, which everybody knows is hot. It's a hot button item, but at the end of the day, the whole end of that, the end goal for there is strictly financial gain. On the post-exploit side, this is more of your hands on the keyboard attacker. They may or may not use commodity malware. They're going to use commodity malware type techniques though. Spam, phishing, it just works. The user is always going to be the weakest link in any security program, so the initial foot in the door is going to come in through that way. But once they're in, it's a little bit more tactical strike. You're on the box, you're moving through, you can establish persistence, maybe come back to it, and you're looking for specific information, you have a specific purpose. Also, the quality of these tools is expanding. Again, there's a lot of research going into from both the good guys and the bad guys, and some of that area gets pretty gray. And developing these tools and really refining them. If you go through some of the GitHub repos and things for some of these tools that are out there, they're actually pretty well written and documented code, which has not traditionally been, 10 years ago you decompiled a piece of malware. It typically wasn't that well written. And so we're seeing that more and more of this activity is moving away from using, some hacked together piece of code and pushed more to, hey, we can use hands on the keyboard, existing sysadmin tools, and move around, do what we need to do, get in, get out, with very, very little or no detection. Also, is moving away from that, the traditional models of things that are going to catch this. Since we're using built-in tools, we've got to start looking more and more at behaviors. TTPs, are going to become the new IOCs in a lot of this kind of activity that we're seeing. Just a quick little sample, preview of some of the examples that we're going to go. But here, this is actual activity and code seen from a use of Empire. Throughout the rest of this conversation, all the samples we're going to be using, we're going to be talking about Empire. If you're not familiar with Empire, at the end of the deck, we got some links and references to that. Empire is a great toolkit. It's built primarily, it was originally built primarily in PowerShell. They've expanded the capabilities to also be cross-platform using, so it's accessible on Mac and Linux type systems using other built-in shells, so your standard Linux shell and Python and a few other tools. But it's a compilation of other post-exploit tools that have all been put together in a nice, well-documented kit. They've got a great website. I'd highly recommend checking it out after you're done here. But this example here is just a quick example of in the first screen here we've got is basically this is the call from the registry, a registry entry making a PowerShell call to reestablish a reverse shell. So they've already been on a box, they've established persistence, and then they're going to be, in this second slide here, we have the encoded, base64 encoded command block where they're actually making the call home. And here you can see the actual call home where they're reaching out to a website, pulling down the code that they're going to actually execute that's going to establish a reverse shell, all within the context of PowerShell. They've even got anti-malware code built into how they're doing that to get around some of the built-in Microsoft tools, leveraging Microsoft's own tool PowerShell. So pretty interesting stuff, and it's pretty, like I say, it's pretty slick and pretty exciting to see where this stuff is going, both from a detection and capability, but also from red teaming side of the house. There's some really great tools here. So really getting into kind of the heart of this discussion. So why EDR? Why are we looking at the endpoint? Why are we focusing more on detection? So one of the common questions that comes up is prevention versus detection. This is a common argument. If you can detect it, why can't you prevent it? So we're talking about, and I agree. If I could prevent it, great. I'd rather prevent it, but we have to have a backstop on that. Rick, do you have additional kind of thoughts on the prevention versus detection?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, prevention's expensive, right? And it takes a while to implement. So, as you're sitting down designing your architectures and stacks and your programs, you get your assessments done, right? And you're like, I got to shore up my perimeter defenses. So cool, I'm going to go buy some new firewalls. Well, that's going to take time, right? Or maybe you buy a better antivirus product, right? Today, you're like, hey, I can't really go get an EDR budget, so I'm just going to buy better AV. Okay, cool. You did something about the problem. Hopefully, you bought something better than you had. But it's all time-consuming, right? All that stuff. And when do the bad guys hit us? Well, they hit us when we're implementing all of these things, right? I mean, defensive controls don't slap in overnight. They certainly have to be matured and tuned and all of this stuff, right? And so I think from my perspective, prevention is great, right? And prevention is getting better. I don't want to make it seem like, prevention has stayed static in our market. That's certainly not true. We made great inroads into blocking some of this stuff. But if you believe the endpoint reports and you go to avtest.org, everyone's 100%, right? So we sort of have these falsehoods that antivirus is 100%, it's going to stop all of this stuff. And the fact of the matter is it isn't. And then when you get into sort of these fancy new ways, so new things that our attackers are doing, like fileless malware, right? And doing things like DLL injections in the memory, which then calls PowerShell. It's not typical that you're going to see a firewall or a network IDS catch that. Yes, maybe they catch the C2 command and control channel, right? But you want to catch it on the endpoint, and you want to stop it before they start laterally moving, right? So it's okay if they get a footprint, but how big is that footprint, and how fast can you detect it? So as prevention continues to improve, and it will, you know, it's going to get better and stop a lot of the front end of this stuff. But the back end, the post exploitation, is just tough, right? I mean, look, Microsoft wanted to enable things like cloud orchestration and all of the awesome stuff we do at PowerShell. I mean, PowerShell is enabling DevOps teams, which is enabling, sort of our current innovation cycles and continuous delivery out to our customers and all of that good stuff, right? But it's not a lot of insight into what it's doing. Not a lot of insight into who ran it, or what are the commands, or are they obfuscated like we've already covered. So I think as defenders, we need to really start thinking about our mobile devices and our endpoints differently. Oftentimes they're out in the wild, and we can't extend network protections to them. Maybe at best a VPN, maybe, right? But they're sort of off in the wild, going wherever, and we just have no good detection for what's occurring down there. So I think the better your detection is, the faster you can find it, and the faster you can respond. That's a winning team.
Yeah, I 100% agree, Rick. And this kind of gets into, the next point here is we're using, the other argument, the common argument that I present, or, point I point out to people is, how do you prevent those built-in tools? I can identify and, prevent, and detect, great, and we can prevent the bad things, but, again, like Rick said, prevention is expensive, especially when you start drilling into trying to prevent very explicit activities that are leveraging built-in operating system tools that you need to enable and improve your IT organization. I mean, PowerShell is a great tool for, like Rick said, for your sysadmins, for your orchestration, for automating tasks. It's built on that same concept that, from anybody who's spent a lot of years doing Linux administration or Unix administration, part of a sysadmin's job was, how do I automate all the tasks that I do? PowerShell provides all that, and we're still seeing that on the Mac and Windows side, or Mac and Linux side also. But so how do you take that same, how do you prevent that activity and identify it in automated fashion? That's where the challenge for prevention comes, and that's where really detection shines. We can prevent the front end, but once they get in the door and they start leveraging those built-in tools, you really need that visibility. And this is where we start talking about, what do you see on the endpoint? What is endpoint visibility? What does that EDR visibility give you to help you identify those things going on in your environment? We're, here at Red Canary, this is where we really focus is taking that endpoint telemetry data, providing visibility. Carbon Black, great tool, providing that visibility. And this is, and looking at that endpoint and really diving in and going through process data. Where are events happening that we're tampering with tools, we're changing file systems, we're changing the registry, and seeing that all happen in a pane of glass that really presents that information to you and lets you start making those more deep tactical decisions as you're going through that data. Again, Rick, you got anything to add from your side on the visibility standpoint?
A couple of things, right? So one, this is a time-intensive thing to do, right? So it was not untypical running a program that an incident would come in. You're like, okay, awesome, I have some sort of alerting system. Maybe it's my firewalls, maybe it's my DLP, maybe it was Splunk, right? Maybe my SIM alerted me. But now I got to do all of this like manual information gathering, right? Sometimes that involved calling the user on the laptop because they were in a remote office and tools weren't deployed. You were in the middle of a deployment, right? So all of that stuff is time, right? And that's the precious resource that we don't have in security right now. They're giving us more money, right? But what we don't have is more time because we don't have enough people doing this. So I think when you look at all of the manual efforts that would occur to collect the same amount of data, put that into a context that's understandable, and then recreate sort of the attack chain. It's why Carbon Black was built, right? Speaking perfectly frank, it was built to catch bad guys in a fast, rapid manner by collecting all of the right interesting security metadata that you'll need to recreate the chain of events that occurred. So in my opinion, this data is all hugely important. I think the other thing I would say too is, sort of model for getting this data, right? I prefer the model that we have, which is we centralize all of this data so we can apply very fast threat analytics and look for those behaviors. We'll start talking about TTPs in a second. Vice having to reach out to endpoints which may or may not be online. Maybe you're reaching out to multiple endpoints and that round trip takes too long. Because what we really want to see as an organization is that we just cut that detection and response time down to minutes, and it should be, right? It shouldn't be 2 days to figure out whether a piece of malware landed on an endpoint.
Yeah. So a couple questions that came in based on this slide and the last slide. First question is what, and I'm going to answer both these kind of in the same response. But one is what threats are you seeing get past advanced or next-gen prevention tools? And then the other question is there a way to mitigate the abuse risk of legitimate tools? So the first response that I'll throw out, and Rick, I'll let you chime in here too in a second, is from the things getting past the advanced tools. Again, it's these type of things that we're talking about where everything's being leveraged on that built-in tool set where you're not using traditional malware and malware techniques. The prevention on that, one of the first things, and I'm going to quote another member of the team here, is good security comes through good IT practices. So part of the way that you mitigate and prevent this is having good IT practices, understanding your environment, understanding and controlling user rights, understanding what is normal in your environment, really having a good view of what's going on in your environment, what looks normal, what doesn't look normal, who has access to things. Working through just a good IT strategy is a key cornerstone of a good plan to prevent this type of abuse. The other piece is, again, I'm going to push the detection front. Having good visibility into your environment, being able to see what's going on, being able to do that baselining, be able to kind of look through and look for those anomalous behaviors at the lowest level that you and your team can comfortably assess. And then Rick, I think you were starting to jump in to say something else on that.
Yeah, I'll take the first question. Actually, I'll take both of them. So on the first question, I would say it depends on how they do prevention. They're all next-gen products. It's all innovative. There's some really cool stuff going on. So I'd have to get a little specific to how each vendor and their philosophies on what they do. That being said, I think the biggest area that we see as an organization that people are missing is fileless malware, right? So malware that doesn't actually land on disk. So memory-based attacks, DLL injections, and then cross-process spawning, right? So hey, I have a Word doc that suddenly spins up PowerShell. And then I would make the detection argument that some of us are better at detecting what PowerShell is actually doing in the commands that are run, which is why I think we're better at the post-exploitation stuff. So on the second question, in no way, shape, or form would I ever say that one control should be your end-all, be-all control, right? So yeah, you're still going to have to build defense in depth. You're still going to have to do things like logical separation. You're going to need, two-factor out there for your admin accounts. You definitely want to restrict who has access to PowerShell and when's that you. And a little tip that I sort of run around and talk to people about, right? So I know what happened when PowerShell went out there. I freaked out like everybody else, right? And I told everybody in my org, no, we're not doing it. There's not enough controls. And 2 weeks later, I changed my mind. But the one thing I think I wanted to get to with that is that if you have system activities that have to occur, run them in Windows, right? Like as an example, if I know I need to do some PowerShell stuff, and I can work with my IT team to say limit that activity between midnight and 1 a.m. Well, while I'm building my great detection, I at least know that any activity that occurs from PowerShell outside of 12 a.m. to 1 a.m. is probably bad, and I'm going to go pay attention to that, right? So I mean, Definitely think of it like disruption in depth. That's the term I like to use. I think a little more than defense in depth, because defense in depth becomes a little passive, right? Um, so yeah, that's my thoughts on it.
Excellent. So, all right, great. And thank you for the questions. Keep them coming. Going to drive some of that discussion, and also kind of building off some of that questions. This rolls right into our next point here. Is we mentioned this before, IOCs versus behaviors. IOCs traditionally were, hey, we found the bad guys. They're using this IP, they're using this hash value, they're using this static measurable item. And those are great. I use them still. There's opportunities to use those, but they're not the end all be all. More and more, for this type of activity, you really have to look at the behaviors. Break down the attacks, break down the things going on into behaviors. And again, leveraging and referencing the MITRE attack framework here. I really like MITRE. It's one of the more in-depth frameworks for this kind of, for mapping out an attack. Everybody else, is probably familiar with the kill chain, same kind of idea, just on the other end of the spectrum from the kind of the depth of how things are broken down. And I'm not saying one or the other is better, but I think using one of these frameworks as part of your strategy is a great way to kind of assess and roadmap your prevention and detection capabilities. And also looking at, this gives you a good model for, okay, what behaviors do we have visibility to? Are we looking for these behaviors? Mapping the behaviors, going through, having your team, both, your red team and your blue team, go through things like Empire and Power Exploit and those kind of tool sets, looking at the capabilities in there, lining those up to some kind of attack framework, and then looking at your portfolio and your capabilities and understanding, hey, do we have visibility at this point? Can we identify when somebody establishes persistence, and what ways can we identify persistence? Can we, identify, anomalies in credential access? We're really good at brute force, but storing credentials and files, we know it's happening. We need to get a handle on that. Understanding that and really start road mapping out across these areas where you have tools, where you have process, where you have people to cover those, and use that as part of your ongoing strategy to review your capabilities and drive really good detection around these things. And this will help you with road mapping these kind of advanced attacks from seeing a post-exploit kit. Again, I keep referencing Empire. It's one of my favorites. But look at their documentation. They've got, a lot of their documentation have actually broken out into these same type of categories. These are, rock solid security guys that are building and researching and doing these tools. They're using the same kind of mentalities and breakdowns of, hey, how do we step through an attack? How do we get in? What are the steps we need to go through? And looking at your defense from that same model. Okay, if attacker comes in, these are the stages and the steps that they're going to go through. Where do I have that visibility?
Yeah, and Joe, real quick on that topic too. I mean, don't forget that interrupting an attack further, earlier in the chain is going to prevent downstream activity, right? So if I can prevent them from gaining persistence, awesome. I'm probably going to prevent them from privilege escalation, right? I happen to love what you said about driving the finance with your red team. This is absolutely something people should be doing out there. Go map these scenarios with your red team and drive findings, right? We all know if we have high-risk findings on our pen test reports, people are more likely to spend money and give us things and some time and projects to go do that. So definitely do that. Other things I'll say about IOCs. IOCs were a logical progression. I think it was good. It was sort of the start of all of this information sharing in our industry, right? We all ran around for years and yelled at each other and said, we're not sharing enough. Okay, cool. Well, now we do. The big analogy I use on this one, differences between the impact an IOC has to a security team and the impact that TTPs and behavior do. If I went to each and every one of you and said, can you do your job from a different IP address? It would be pretty easy to pull off, right? You probably drive to Starbucks, you go to your friend's house, hook up to their Wi-Fi, drive to the office, and you're off and running. But if I said to you as your boss, I want you to do your job, but I want you to change every single way you've ever done it. I want you to work differently than you've ever worked before. You're going to be slower, you're going to be less efficient, and you're not going to hit the scale, right? So when we talk about the cyber economics behind this stuff, the bad guys need to be able to get ROI on what they're doing, right? So if we can interrupt that ROI and make it take longer for them to do it, or stop the automated activity and make them pivot to a manual activity, chances are they're probably going to go after somebody else because the barrier for them to get that ROI is too high. Now, again, I'll take off the table nation states discussions because they're driven a little differently about what they care about. They're probably going to spend more time to gather that intelligence, right? But yeah, so that's I think my nutshell thoughts on IOCs versus TTPs. I love TTPs.
Yeah. So, and just a follow-up question we got. So the question is, I've seen the attack matrix before, and it's a lot. I agree with that point 100%. Which attack matrix behavior is most important to be able to detect for someone just getting started? So my answer or non-answer is it depends.
Yeah, I agree.
Is the kind of the first step is the first thing you should do is look at what you already have. What capabilities do you already have? And you don't have to use attack. You could use kill chain is a great model. Look at it, start simple. The other thing I would say is start at the top. Start at those headers. Start at, hey, do we have ways to detect persistence? And then work down and start actually mapping out your portfolio, mapping out your processes, mapping out where you have people and coverage and expertise, and then identify the gaps. Use a standard risk-based model. Where is the most risk in your environment? Are you a retailer and you've got a hard outer shell, but your PCI environment is really locked down, but you have exposures at your remote locations because of monitoring capabilities, low bandwidth, things like that. Okay, well, understand where those risks are and understand what capabilities those risks present to your environment. Maybe it's maybe you're in a completely different. Maybe you're a small small hospital, and so you have a very different risk profile. You have a very different set of data that's the keys to the kingdom kind of data for you. Part of it is really, like I say, taking this, using some framework and mapping out your capabilities and identifying your gaps, and then taking a very risk-based approach to understand where those gaps are. The one thing I will say, and is don't take the old model of having a hard outer shell with a squishy center. That doesn't work anymore today. Again, going back to that idea that the user is the weak point, they make it real easy to get past those perimeter defenses. I'm not saying that we don't need perimeter defenses, but don't focus your efforts 100% on those perimeter defenses. And that's the other reason that we're pushing kind of the endpoint and expanding that visibility. But
yeah, and just real quick as a follow-up to that, we all read the reports, right? Things like preventing credential and protecting your credentials, right? So if we talked about two-factor and protecting your credentials, that's going to take care of a large amount of the threats, right? So to the point of, hey, measure your risks, do a risk assessment. How risky is that? And then how much bang do you get for the bucks that you spend and the time that you spend on it? If I'm going to go harden anything, like hey, I need to start on day 0 and something's got to be done. Well, I'm going to start on credential access because it's going to be a long lead time. You've got IT people that need to change their operations. You've got all of this stuff, right? So great place to focus the effort. If you can protect your credentials and you're doing things like two-factor and all of that good stuff, well, yeah, the chances are they're not going to be able to do that. Maybe they could gain persistence on one box, right? But you're already sort of disrupting that chain down the road. And then you look and say, okay, cool. Now that I've got my credentials handled, which is like 70% of the attacks out there, where else do I need to go spend my prevention dollars? That's the way I like to think of it. I like as much coverage as I can get for one spend in one project, right? So if I'm going to go fight for a project, I want my credentials to be as secure as possible. And then I'm probably going to go fight for detection everywhere else. Because here's why. We've invested, and it's pretty typical, you walk into a shop, we've invested millions of dollars in things like network detection controls, DLP, again, content filtering, firewalls, but we don't actually have a tool to measure how effective any of that stuff is, right? Because AV's lying to us. I think we can all agree that AV allows things through that it doesn't report, right? So how do I know how good my endpoint protection is if I don't have a tool out there that's sort of measuring what gets through all my other filtering? Do I need to go whip my firewall guys, right, and get them on the phone and have a very hard conversation? Do I need to change what I'm doing from a firewall and inspection perspective? Looking at clean pipe and bringing some of that stuff in. The answer is I don't think you can actually make a decision until you have the data. I think most of the time we just sort of like take a swag at it. So yeah, EDR should provide you that data to say, where do I need to go shore up the rest of my prevention as well?
So, and it's a good transition point. We're actually going to start, kind of getting into the, taking a little bit deeper dive here. How do we detect this stuff? What does these behaviors look like? Should you be looking for? So, got some samples here. These are actual, sample sets that we use internally here, Red Canary. I believe some or all of these are probably on the Carbon Black user website too. So there's no secret sauce here. This is some basic information that we're using internally that you can implement in your own environment with whatever detection tools that you have, as long as you have that visibility. So kind of just explaining what we're looking at here. The first one, looking for privilege escalation. Basically, we're looking for PowerShell, and then it's launching a child process. PowerShell launching both whoami and SC. For those who aren't familiar, SC is the Windows built-in command line service manager. And what this activity, this behavior is key targeted around is in the PowerSploit kit. There's a tool or a script called PowerUp. One of the activities it does is it actually launches PowerShell, PowerUp, built-in PowerSploit, PowerUp, built-in PowerShell, launches an instance of SC for every running service on a Windows box, and then looks for the opportunity for privilege escalation, and runs that escalation. So what it's looking to do is getting admin or system level privileges. So looking for PowerShell launching those two processes together is pretty clearly indicative of this type of activity. And again, now we're starting to look at behaviors and tools being used. Again, credential theft, looking for either PowerShell, WSM Provost, which is basically remote PowerShell. So if you go from one box to another, the actual process that runs the PowerShell activity is that MS host service, or looking for an unsigned process, so not a process that's not digitally signed. And then it's also loading these two common DLLs, the SAMlib and the Vault CLI DLL. These two are commonly used in credentialing activities. If you launch Mimikatz, so Mimikatz for harvesting passwords and credential information out of memory, it always loads those two libraries. If you can pipe Mimikatz through PowerShell type activity to do that credential harvesting, you're still going to see those same libraries get loaded. So again, looking at towards behaviors, getting a little bit more complicated even. Opening up the activities is, hey, these are some common tools. Should these be making network connections to the outside world? And some of these ideas have to be tuned to your environment, but these are some of the things we're looking at, and either specifically being leveraged for external communications, and what external is depends on your environment. If you're hosting a lot of stuff in the cloud, so in Microsoft, at Amazon, Rackspace, wherever, that definition of external is kind of a moving target anymore. But understanding that, and also some of this goes back to good IT practices. You have this well documented. Okay, good. Then take that information, build that into your detection capabilities, and then start looking for these type of tools, going out to external sources. And then just jumping in one more detection capability, looking at misuse of or reuse of internal tools. So, explain it a little bit here. It's kind of a, looks, for those who aren't familiar, this is an actual built-in Red Canary's internal detection syntax. But basically, what we're looking for here is any signed Microsoft binary that we class as a Windows CLI tool. So think PowerShell, CMD, Robocopy, a lot of those tools we were just looking at being renamed and executed. So again, from your from EDR visibility, hey, we know this is the Windows command prompt. It's signed by Windows. You can look at the internal name that's part of the digital signature of that, and look for that information being executed under a different name. Seen this in attacks where user lands on the box, takes a copy of PowerShell, CMD, WScript, whatever scripting or command binary it needs, copying it over to a different directory, renaming it as something to kind of try and obfuscate that, and then executing their context within there. But again, using all those living off the land built-in tools to perform those types of activities. Then we keep drilling down into some real-world examples and some real-world activity. So this is a screenshot from Carbon Black. This is, so we talked about that PowerSploit power-up. This is what it looks like in an EDR tool. This is what it looks like in Carbon Black. What actually happened here is that initial regserve32 process, the command line, so somebody from a command line typed regserve32 and then passed as a command line string to it a GitHub address that was hosting the PowerSploit power-up code. So it just said, hey, go to this, run it, pulls it right out of the website, opens up PowerShell with a encoded command line. That encoded command line gets decoded, executed as a command, and then PowerShell runs through that SC command. Now, if you weren't looking for this activity or you didn't have this visibility, it's probably not a lot that would detect it, except for maybe if maybe you're blocking access to GitHub or have some URL filtering specifically to those GitHub repos. But again, I can fork those repos to whatever resource I want hosted on a website and pull that down. But with this EDR visibility, this becomes super noisy and you got a lot of visibility. Hey, this doesn't look like a normal process chain that I should see in my environment. This is probably something terrible and I should take some action on it. Looking at, again, kind of walking down through the same base attack. In this instance, like I mentioned before, what PowerUp does is it actually looks for an exploitable Windows service. In this case, we exploited part of the Intel management engine. So a lot of your laptops and systems that have wireless cards or Intel-based video cards or anything like that. There's some basic processes. It found a way through its scan and through what it was looking for. Saw an exploit opportunity to leverage that service, and then that service then injected and ran. Made an external network connection, injected into PowerShell, and this is all post that power-up. So they've gotten in the door, they've done some of their initial recon, launched the service, found again a built-in service running, trusted, signed by Intel, running on the box. That then pushes into PowerShell. PowerShell then pulls down some code. Passes that encoded command to PowerShell, which lo and behold is a tool called Bloodhound, and you can see in the excuse me, in the view here, the decoded command line is PowerShell is actually reading a string off of a external website. So it doesn't even have to be, that code doesn't have to be pulled down from anywhere. It just says, hey, go scrape this website that has a text string and pass it as a command. Other than the other cool kind of whiz-bang idea that I like to tout just from a Red Canary analyst standpoint, switching hats for just a second, all this decoding, we do it automatically on our end for our analysts. So just kind of pointing that out just because it's kind of a little cool feature. So just want to be proud of my engineering and dev team for providing that to my guys. So that speeds things up and helps us. But just something that we have going on there. So for those that aren't familiar with Bloodhound, what Bloodhound does is actually it's an automated network mapping tool. So I'm in an environment. I've landed. I've got my PowerShell tools that I've got access to. I run some Bloodhound scripts. Now I start collecting all of the domain information. What open user sessions, group memberships, domain trust, local admin accounts. Drop it all to a nice little CSV, and these are, I can pass that back out the door, and some of your traditional activity for exfiltration, if you're passing a small CSV, that's not going to trip some of your standard NetFlow type activity and things like that. So all this stuff is very small. You're talking plain text, so you're not bringing in large volumes of data back and forth. So it makes it very low and slow. And you can move around pretty quickly with given this information. So moving on to a different attack that we observed. This time, we're attacking a Mac. Hey, I thought Mac was immune to malware. Nobody attacks Mac. Mac's unsafe because I've got my MacBook Pro, as I say that from a MacBook Pro. But Mac is just as susceptible to this type of activity. In this case, malicious Excel doc. Hey, I thought that was a Windows-only thing. Guess what? It's not. The same kind of thing. Malicious Excel doc. Exploits, and hey, look at that. This looks really familiar. Same kind of behavior we're seeing on the Windows environment. We're just using different shells, different tools that are already built into that operating system to do the same kind of activity. So in this case, instead of using PowerShell and CMD, we're using the native SH shell on Mac plus Python. Python's built into Mac. It's built into most Linux distributions. So same behavior. So if we're looking for this kind of behavior, so in this case, maybe you're looking for any Office suite tool, whether that's your Microsoft Office, your Open Office, something launching a shell and seeing what those shells are doing. And there are some legitimate cases that I've seen where there's certain tools that do that, but again, without that visibility, you really don't know. So in this case, again, we have an encoded base64 encoding, favorite of these kind of tools, being passed to Python, and then when we open that, again, our automatic decoding, you pass out a block of code, and what this is doing is it actually makes an SSL connection out, does some checks for some built-in security tools. So any of you Mac users out there, if you're not running Little Snitch, I recommend running Little Snitch. Little Snitch is a great local firewall, and the attackers know that, and right in there's a command for grepping the running processes looking for Little Snitch, and then working down through a lot of the you'll notice a lot of the strings in here, if you do a comparison, are very similar to ones that we've seen in other PowerShell tools and PowerShell and Empire tools. Again, this is all built in. This is all stuff being built into the Empire toolkit. It's all going through, makes a call, passes, checks for Little Snitch. If Little Snitch aren't there, passes all the commands over to Python. Python executes, and here we see the just drilling down as those individual activities are actually going as it's stepping through that script. So here's our grep for Little Snitch. Python, everything gets passed to Python. Python makes a connection out, and then we've got a reverse shell on the box. First thing I do when I compromise a box is I figure out who I am. On Mac, the ID command is great for that. It tells you, it actually dumps out, who's who's on there gives you a numeric identifier, so you can pass both by user ID and that numeric identifier on that Mac system and start working your way around the box. Grab some process information, see what's running on the box, leverage that, leverage those processes. Gathering host information. Again, this is all you're working down through your attack framework or your kill chain framework. Landed on the box, establish who we are, start, gathering reconnaissance. Checks where we are in the operating system, and then I'll start working on trying to escalate my privileges. So, then, again, just some quick examples of these tools being used in other environments, and then just kind of wrapping things up here. What are we gaining by going to EDR? What is the endpoint visibility giving us? Again, some of the samples from what we talked about. Shells making network connections to an external host. Yeah, sure, your network capabilities can and would see those external network connections, but if you don't know to look for those specific networks that they're going to, you may not have that visibility. Or if it's somewhere, something's hosted on a trusted site. Again, all this stuff's up on GitHub. If you guys have developers that use GitHub for tools and for pulling back repositories, things like that, then it gets complicated on how you prevent that. Looking at binary information, is this a trusted signed binary, digital signature on the binary, but it's running under an unusual name or running from an unusual path. Multiple authentications from one system to another. Trusted binaries doing a lot of a whole bunch of network connections. Hey, should SVC host be making 10,000 network connections to a bunch of sites that appear to be related to ads? That sounds a little weird. Other specific activities, suspicious activity related to use of sysadmin tools. Hey, should that PowerShell host process be have an inbound connection to it from outside of my network? Trusted processes spawning other untrusted processes. Again, talking about just talking about Word and things spawning spawning shells, spawning SVC host, Excel doing those type of things. These are all things that EDR grants you from a visibility perspective. So I'm gonna kind of try and power through the last couple of things so we can get to some questions. We're a little bit behind time. So just jumping in, again, test yourself. We leveraged PowerShell, PowerShell Empire, so the Empire toolkit in these examples that we gave. So want to give credit to those guys. Check out their website. Follow these guys on Twitter. Real smart bunch of researchers. Great guys to engage with. So over at the Varus group. And use these tools for yourself. Red team your company uses this part. Make sure your quarterly pen tests are using good, solid tools. Talking about thanks to Carbon Black, Rick. Just if you want to take a quick moment, mention, give the pitch on Carbon Black.
Yeah, we're the market leader in application whitelisting, right? So we believe in a default deny model to prevent this malware from landing on the disk, right? We're the market leader in endpoint visibility and IR. And the other thing, just to piggyback real quick on the detection piece, that stuff is all awesome. And every EDR tool should do those things. They should gather all the data that we've said. That's what makes a complete picture. But it also becomes about response. Right, so again, talking about time as the valuable resource, being able to automate the response to some of this stuff instead of actually having to send an IT admin to go get a laptop and bring it in and re-image it. I mean, all that stuff costs time and money, and you're not really moving your business forward, right? You're just keeping them up and running. And then finally, you guys are going to hear a whole lot about the new prevention model that we're bringing to bear with CB Defense and our next gen AV offering. So we're pretty excited about that. You'll hear a bunch of stuff at RSA. We've got a big road tour lined up for the year. So if you're interested in learning about behavioral-based event stream processing next gen AV, I'll be out there in a city near you soon. So looking forward to getting out there with the community and talking to everybody.
Thanks, Rick. So, and then just talk to about Red Canary. So what we are is we're a managed endpoint detection response team. We do hosted endpoint EDR, providing visibility for detection, triage, and notification. So we're a partner on your team. By bringing on Red Canary, you get a whole slew of security experts. You get our SOC, and we're looking through that data, helping you identify these threats, helping provide you with the information that you need to identify and take that next step in cleaning these things up. Our analysts are going through, are kind of experts in this area. This is where we focus. So from an EDR standpoint, if you have questions of either you want to implement this but you don't have the staff to do it, or you just want to talk about how do you do better detection via EDR, reach out to us. We're happy to talk. One of our technical account managers is happy to talk, or reach out to me directly, and I'm happy to kind of discuss some of the things we're seeing and some of the things we're capable of doing for you. So at this point, we're right at time. I'm going to hang on the line for a little bit, answer some further questions, but if anybody's got to run, feel free to drop off, and then, and I appreciate your time, and again, follow up with Rick, follow up with myself, find out more about what both of our companies are doing.
I'll hang out and answer questions too. I got some time.
Okay, so first question here is, considering the intrusions investigated by Red Canary, do you see many customizations of attack tools or just use of the original tools as Empire, PowerSploit, Mimikatz, PWDump, others? So I'd say it's kind of a mix. One of the things that we don't focus on heavily at Red Canary is attribution, either on specific attacker attribution or tool attribution. If we know what it is and it's a cut and dry instance of, hey, this is pure and simple, out of the box, PowerSploit, Empire, Mimikatz, whatever, then yeah, we'll call that out. But at the same time, we're more focused on identifying those behaviors associated with those tools. So, bad PowerShell behavior is bad PowerShell behavior, and we'll lay that out and provide you with kind of the visibility of how it got, how they got in the door, what they did once they got in the door, and as quickly as we can get that information over you and help you take those first steps. But like I say, it's a mix. The other thing I will point to that is there is a trend of, as advanced attacks and techniques get developed, lower level attacks start leveraging those. So hey, we've got these really cool PowerShell tools. Okay, now we're seeing commodity malware that's going fileless, that's using the registry, doing some of the similar techniques and similar behaviors. And then we're also seeing, even further down kind of the chain of threats, things like adware and toolbars that are using, again, the same behaviors. Hey, we don't have to bring our own code. We can just use stuff on the box to continue to propagate and leverage these tools and get around some of the common prevention tools. So, from that standpoint, we're seeing trends in the same techniques being leveraged across multiple spectrums of the kind of attack family. So next question, are you seeing a lot of Mac and Linux post-exploit activity? What are some of the trends? So again, going back to the trends, the big one is Mac. Everybody for years and years and years has said, well, there's no Mac malware, Mac's immune, Mac can't be attacked, and Macs become more popular, and as the Mac footprint grows, so does the interest from attackers of looking at ways to exploit that and looking at ways to leverage that. So we're seeing more of that kind of activity where people and attackers are moving towards targeting Mac especially. I mean, Linux, a lot of the tools that work on Mac work on Linux and vice versa. At its core, Mac is a BSD-based system. There's, at the user space and some of the higher levels, there's, obviously differences, but a lot of the same behaviors and techniques are being leveraged. And again, that same kind of trend, hey, we're seeing post-exploit activity. on your Mac. We're also starting to see, Mac malware, within our customer base and everything. I've personally seen a large uptick in Mac adware, unwanted toolbars, leveraging, misinformation and things like that to push onto the Mac environment, and a lot of the same problems that any Windows administration or any Windows security program is kind of dealt with are starting to crop up more and more on Mac, and Mac's not as immune as it used to be.
Yeah, and then on the Linux side, right? So I think we'll continue to see sort of as the innovation happens, right, on BSD for Mac. We'll see that over on the Linux side. I think a couple of things Linux has going for it. Typically, the system admins, at least in my experience, are a little tighter on controls. They're a little tighter on things like configuration management through Puppet. So some of these sort of preventative controls are maybe a little further on because it's a more mature cycle on the system administration side. But I absolutely see, and I think we saw a couple, like in the last couple of months of the year, more and more Linux-based attacks, especially, and I think Joe talked about this earlier, as we're proliferating tools across platforms, like Bash is on Windows, we've got WMI coming to Linux, so like cats and dogs are living together and that whole thing. So I think it'll be interesting to watch, but the more management tools we push out there, I can absolutely tell you that the more attacks we'll see.
So next question in the line here, is there any open source analog to Empire for blue teams in terms of detecting behavior? I've heard POSSEC Ben0XA is an option. Any other ideas? So from the open source detection capabilities, so on, I would say on your Windows side, there's some opportunities with Sysmon and some Windows logging. If you're running a Windows shop, PowerShell logging is something that you should be turning on. There's also some PowerShell controls that I've seen some recent articles from Microsoft starting to push out. There's some open source EDR tools. I haven't spent a lot of time working or looking at those. Like anything else, as the market matures, the number of tools expand. Most of my day-to-day is spent leveraging carbon black data, so I'm somewhat biased towards that. But I look at if you're looking at for open source tools or some open source capabilities, some of the tools that I've seen that I'm at least keeping my eye out to see what they develop in the market, and as far as capabilities, is either Lima Charlie or OS Query are two open source kind of endpoint focused tools. So another reference here.
That's exactly what I was going to mention, Joe. Those are the two that we've probably got our eye on from an open source perspective. A lot of manual work, a lot of all of that stuff that comes with it, right? So no big sale pitch for CB, because personally I love that we're open sourcing a lot of this stuff. And then the other thing too is there's been a website that was started called threathunting.net. There's a lot of open source scripts. They sort of walk you through like, hey, here's how with normal Microsoft tools you can go find like some malicious behavior on an endpoint. So maybe as a reaction to an incident, you go run these set of activities with your analyst on an endpoint to gather that data, enrich it, and then kick it up to like a level 2 analyst or an engineer to take care of. That's sort of what we're seeing. But yeah, I mean, there's tons of companies that are out there, in the Valley that are starting to publish a lot of this stuff out too, which is really good for the industry.
So yeah, just one other quick reference that got passed to me, Deep Blue CLI from Eric Conrad over in the SANS group, put out its PowerShell detection capabilities. Other question we got here, how does it look for you to integrate with our internal team, and what type of dwell time reduction do your clients typically see? So I'll be a two-part question, so I'll answer it in two parts. How do we integrate with your internal team? We stand up your Carbon Black server for you. We monitor, we take care of it from that aspect. We help you with deployment. From an engagement standpoint, we have technical account managers that it's a named person on that you get assigned from day one. they're your face of Red Canary. They're security people first and foremost. So they, they're your first point of contact for escalation, for questions, for helping you with everything from, hey, I need to integrate, my Red Canary data into my help desk system, into my Slack, into my SIM, into whatever, to, hey, I've got a question, I got this, got an alert from Red Canary or some other provider, can you help me understand it? On the back end, all that data is feeding into us, us being the Red Canary SOC. So our analysts are going through all that, that endpoint data, looking for these type of things, identifying the threats, and then from a detection, dwell time reduction, what we're providing is we're generating our alerts basically, we're generating a execution timeline. So we're, what we've seen at the point of execution, as soon as we've identified it, we're providing with all the information so that you can see how that got in the door and what's happened so far, and getting that out to you as quickly as possible. As from a dwell time, we've reduced, from an example that we had, a regional hospital got, attacked by, ransomware, and ransomware is not our specialty, so to speak, but in this instance, it's kind of it's a good point to talk to. There was a, attacker came in, got ransomware, and was using PS-exec-based network spreader to spread that around their environment. We notified them right away, helped them walk through cleaning that up, blocking. We ended up blocking PS-exec temporarily to help them triage and get through their response. And they had that cleaned up. They were down for about a day, all said and done. Similar attack happened in parallel at another hospital. They were down. They actually had to shut down the hospital and move patients out, and they were down for weeks. So, from a dwell time perspective, we're on it pretty quick, and we're helping our customers identify that as soon as that data is getting through the door, and something's happening. We're on there. We're engaged with the customer and working with them to identify and clean up that problem. Okay. So let me just check in. Have we got any other? Nope. I think that's about it for questions. So again, I invite anybody to reach out to Carbon Black or to Red Canary to talk to us. We're happy to have meet us at the cons. Give us you drop us an email, hit us up on Twitter. Happy to have those conversations. Understand what we're seeing, understand what you're seeing, where your needs are, and how we can help. Even if it's not as a customer, just sharing security information is good for the community. So I thank you for your time, and look forward to meeting you all out in the community.